Greetings friends, you are watching Ruslan Belov's channel, and today we will take a detailed look at the situation in Ukraine as of December 21st, 2025. A very large number of significant events have occurred over the past 24 hours, so let us proceed with the review without delay. Undoubtedly, the main topic of the day is the sharply increased activity of units of the armed forces of the Russian Federation on the Sumy axis. At present, statements are coming from virtually every source claiming that the Russian army is allegedly opening a new front and launching a large-scale offensive. Various map adjustments, analytical reports, and video materials are appearing. Moreover, footage showing the capture of Ukrainian servicemen in this area has already been published. Against this backdrop, talk of the start of a so-called Sumy offensive is becoming increasingly common. However, I personally assess what is happening somewhat differently. If we return to the very beginning of the special military operation and the conflict as a whole, which began in 2022, we can recall a term that has been regularly used throughout this entire period: the thousand cuts tactic. This concept has been applied by Russian units quite actively, though most often not in such a demonstrative manner. At the same time, in 2023-2024, it was the Ukrainian side that systematically employed this approach ahead of its own major operations. And what we are observing now on the part of the Russian Federation, in my view, is not the opening of a new front near Sumy, and does not indicate the start of a general offensive in this direction. It is merely one element of that same thousand cuts tactic. The primary objective of these strikes, including the advance in the Sumy area, is not direct movement toward the city of Sumy itself, although such a scenario cannot be completely ruled out in the future. At the current stage, the main goal is to conceal the primary strike. A larger offensive is being prepared elsewhere. There are many versions, including quite fantastical ones, up to and including the Odessa direction, given current events. However, it is far more likely that we are talking about a powerful attack along the existing line of contact. At present, Russian command appears to be trying to conceal the preparation of this strike, stretch and disperse Ukrainian reserves along the entire front line, and then deliver the main blow, one that Ukrainian armed forces units simply will not have sufficient resources to repel. This is precisely why, over the past 24 hours and in recent days overall, we have seen a stream of reports about localized strikes and limited attempts by Russian units to advance on several sections of the front simultaneously. In particular, updates have arrived today from the classical Sumy direction, the sector between the city of Sumy and the settlement of Sudzha. Russian advances are being recorded there, confirmed by video footage and analytical reviews. A number of mapping services, both neutral and pro-Russian, report that Russian units have once again entered the settlement of Andrevka and entrenched themselves there. Fighting in this area continues. At the same time, video recordings from this location are being published. These images show Ukrainian FPV drone operators striking Russian positions along a forest belt. Both sets of footage indicate that over the past several days, possibly even over the past week, the Russian side has managed to improve its tactical position in this area. Overall, this localized micro-offensive began approximately on December 10th. This is roughly how the map looked about 10 days ago, and since then it has been adjusted almost daily based on data from mapping services and expert assessments. As of today, Russian units have once again approached closely to settlements such as Mala Korchakivka, Pisarivka, and Korchakivka, effectively the second defensive line of the city of Sumy. This is precisely the first of many strikes within the framework of the thousand cuts tactic. The next area is the Krnopilia district. This direction is essentially a forgotten one. It was discussed only in the very first days of the conflict in February 2022, when Russian forces were just beginning their advance. It was through this chain of settlements that the Russian Federation entered Ukrainian territory in the Sumy area back in 2022. Incidentally, confirmation of this can be found even on pro-Ukrainian mapping resources. They have made corresponding adjustments, indicating that a number of settlements along the state border have moved into the grey zone. Here it is important to pay attention to the color coding. In addition to grey, a light green color is used. On pro-Ukrainian maps, light green denotes territories over which Ukraine restored control during the 2022 counteroffensive, after Russian forces began regrouping and withdrawing from Kharkiv in March-April. At that time, settlements such as Hrabovsky and Ryazne had previously already been under Russian control. Today we are observing the reverse process, a renewed shift of the line of control. Over the past few days, the map here has been adjusted repeatedly. Yesterday, information appeared about control over Vysok, and today a number of neutral, pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian sources are recording advances in the Hrabovsky area. Some experts claim that Russian reconnaissance and sabotage groups have already advanced from Hrabovsky toward the settlement of Ryazne. With a high degree of probability, the map will undergo further changes here in the coming days. Already today, video footage of a clash on the territory of Hrabovsky has been published. According to available information, 7 or 8 Ukrainian servicemen were controlling the entire village, living alongside local residents and possibly even preparing to celebrate the new year. In the end, all of them were either captured or partially fell into the hands of Russian units. In effect, the entire direction was being held by a group of 8 people. It is obvious that even in the event of a limited offensive, even by a force of just 20 soldiers, such a group would not be able to offer serious resistance. This is a clear illustration of the thousand cuts tactic under conditions where the main Ukrainian reserves are concentrated near Kupansk, Pocrsk, and in the Zaparigia direction. In such a situation, the Russian army is capable of initiating movement at almost any point, and there is often simply no one available to stop this advance. At the same time, a second strike is being delivered, the primary purpose of which is to divert reserves. Attempts to redeploy them from the Kupansk and Pokrovsk directions back to the Sumy axis in order to stabilize the front line and prevent further Russian advances. The next video materials are already coming from the Kharkiv region. Hostilities have resumed in the area of the settlement of Sotnitsky Kozachok. Ukrainian sources are publishing footage showing several dozen Russian servicemen entering the territory of this settlement. According to estimates, around 20 fighters are beginning to entrench themselves in the village. This is another localized strike, pursuing the same objective, to force the Ukrainian side to redeploy FPV drone operators and units to stabilize the situation and prevent further Russian movement toward Kharkiv, Derhachi, Zolochiv, Kozacha Lopan, and other settlements. This is yet another point of tension requiring command decisions, force redistribution, and attention from leadership. At the same time, regular strikes continue in the Volchansk area, both toward Bily Kolodiaz and in the direction of the Pechenihi Reservoir. Today, some pro-Russian mapping services made adjustments in the area of the settlement of Hravske. This is another localized strike requiring a response from the Ukrainian side. And it is important to emphasize that each of these strikes has the potential to escalate into something larger. Note that activity is being recorded around Sumy and Kharkiv, while there is virtually no information from the Chernihiv direction. What is happening along the border between the Chernihiv and Bryansk regions remains an open question, and it cannot be ruled out that strikes may follow there in the coming days as well. Thus, the North troop grouping is operating across an extremely extended sector, from the Chernihiv region to the city of Kharkiv. It creates the impression that this is too large an area of responsibility for a single grouping. It cannot be ruled out that, in the future, a separate grouping may be formed, similar to the Dnipro grouping, which would take on specific tasks in this direction. Now we smoothly move to the Kupiansk sector of the front. Here, the Ukrainian side continues its counteroffensive actions. Today, a number of experts and cartographers have published new data and made changes to maps, which are also reflected in our review. Let us examine the situation in detail, starting with the area of the settlement of Petropavlivka. Several weeks ago, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation announced that Petropavlivka had fully come under Russian control. If we look at the timeline, Russian advances in the area of Kucherivka, according to the Ministry of Defense, were recorded on December 7th. Accordingly, information about Petropavlivka appeared even earlier, approximately in November, almost a month ago. However, today most mapping services are adjusting the situation in the opposite direction. If we return to the events of November 20th, on the night of November 21, 2025, the Ministry of Defense reported significant advances by Russian units in the Petropavlivka area. It was at the end of November that the peak of offensive activity and the greatest successes of Russian forces on this sector occurred. Starting on November 22, 23, the situation changed radically. The Ukrainian side launched a counteroffensive. The first counterstrikes were recorded as early as November 27th, almost a month ago. From late November through early December, the map has been gradually adjusted in favor of the armed forces of Ukraine. The sector is being incrementally cut up into small fragments. Russian units, according to geolocation data and expert assessments, are step-by-step pulling back toward the Oskil River. At the same time, regrouping is occurring not only on the western bank of the Oskil, but also inside a kind of pocket in the Kupiansk Uzlovyi and Petropavlivka area. Today, a number of mapping services reported an attempt by the Ukrainian side to carry out a counterstrike in the Petropavlivka area. According to these reports, as a result of the counterattack, Russian units allegedly had to withdraw from the settlement itself back into the fields beyond it. However, at present this information is not confirmed by geolocation materials, so it is too early to draw conclusions. We will wait for additional data. If it appears, it will then be possible to make more substantiated adjustments, marking the sector either in yellow or red. If we speak directly about Kupiansk, the situation here looks clearer. Video materials from this sector have been published today. In the first footage distributed by the Russian side, we can clearly see two Ukrainian soldiers occupying positions in a building, which is almost immediately struck by a Russian FPV drone. This structure was geolocated. The strike occurred along Zakiznikiv-Kupianska Street. Based on this footage, a corresponding adjustment was made. Ukrainian units continue to move toward the Oskil River, attempting to isolate the central part of Kupiansk from the rest of the territory. Further adjustments are being recorded to the northwest, along the same street, based on data from mapping services. In addition, another video has been published from the area of Oskilsky Lane. Its content is similar. Several Ukrainian sabotage groups occupy positions in buildings, attempting to infiltrate through Russian defensive lines, after which they are struck by a drone. All of this footage confirms that the Ukrainian army is gradually advancing in both the southern and northern parts of Kupiansk. In essence, the same tactic is now being applied that the Russian side previously used in Pocrsk and Mnoharad. Infiltration by small groups, attempts to entrench, fragmented pressure along the entire city. However, in this case, it is significantly easier for the Ukrainian side to ensure supply and logistics than for Russian units, which are forced to operate across the river under constant drone strikes. This is precisely what is producing the observed results. Other footage shows Russian drones carrying out a series of strikes against Ukrainian armed forces reserves, and reinforcements being concentrated along the N26 highway toward Kupiansk. Overall, the situation here is clear. Russian units are forcing the Ukrainian side to concentrate substantial forces specifically on the Kupiansk sector. This, in turn, leads to the exposure of a vast stretch from Kharkiv to Sumy. Russian command appears to be attempting to exploit this weakening of the front line by increasing activity on other axes, either to draw away reserves or to conceal preparations for a more large-scale offensive that may unfold on an entirely different section of the front, unrelated directly to Sumy, Kupiansk, or Kharkiv. Next, we move on to the Lyman direction. For several consecutive days, virtually no information has been coming from this sector. The area around Lyman is shrouded in the fog of war. At the same time, the president of the Russian Federation previously stated that Russian units had managed to take control of at least 50% of the city. However, these statements are not yet reflected on the maps of most cartographic services. In the Siversk area, the Russian army continues an active westward offensive along a broad front, from the M03 highway to the Siversky Donets River. In the Zakitny area, over the past 24 hours, Russian units have advanced on the eastern outskirts of the settlement. Heavy artillery fire is being conducted there, and a full-scale assault is effectively underway, aimed at forcing Ukrainian formations to retreat further south toward the settlements of Kriva Luka and Kalaniki. At the same time, the offensive continues in the area of Sviato-Pokrovske. Russian units are advancing both along the heights north of the settlement and along its perimeter toward Riznikivka. A number of experts note that reconnaissance and sabotage groups may have advanced quite deeply here, and that fighting is gradually shifting toward Kriva Luka, Kaleniki, and Riznikivka. Further south, active offensive operations are underway in the areas of Kromov and Bondan. This information is confirmed by neutral and pro-Russian sources. The advance is proceeding toward Bondan, and then further in the direction of Nikiforivka. All movement vectors here converge on Rai Oleksandrivka, a key settlement on this sector, through which further advances may later be developed both toward Sloviansk-Kramatorsk and toward Mykolaiivka, as well as the Sloviansk thermal power plant. On the Kostiantynivka sector, over the past 24 hours, the map has been adjusted in favor of the armed forces of Ukraine. According to pro-Ukrainian and neutral resources, the Ukrainian side carried out a series of counterstrikes in the Kostiantynivka area, which resulted in Russian units being forced to withdraw from dacha areas east of the city. Ukrainian advances deeper toward Prytakane are also reported. At the same time, none of these publications are currently supported by video evidence, just as earlier reports of Russian advances on this axis were likewise not confirmed by footage. It is also worth recalling that earlier the command of the Center Group of Forces stated plans to pass through a significant portion of Kupiansk by mid-December. However, the factor of the mass redeployment of Ukrainian reserves to the Kostiantynivka area appears to have had a serious impact on the situation. This negatively affects the defensive capability of several directions at once along the border areas of the Bryansk, Chernihiv, Kursk, Sumy, Kharkiv, and Belgorod regions. Judging by the available information, there are serious manpower issues in this zone, and the Russian army is attempting to take advantage of this. We now move to the Pokrovsk direction. Assault operations continue in the area of Mnoharad. Over the past 24 hours, the map has changed again. Several additional neighborhoods in the Svetla area have been adjusted. Ukrainian sources have published fresh footage showing the almost completely destroyed central part of Mnoharad. According to estimates by neutral cartographers, approximately 3% of the city, possibly even less, remains under Ukrainian control. Many experts agree that within the next 3 to 4 days, the Russian Ministry of Defense may confirm full control over this settlement. Today, footage was also published showing Russian servicemen raising flags east of Svetle. Based on these videos, additional adjustments were made. Previously, it was reported that Svetle had fully come under Russian control, and now further advances toward the central part of Mnoharad are being recorded. Apparently, the conclusion of fighting here is only a matter of days. At the same time, Russian units are advancing north of Pokrovsk, expanding their zone of control toward Hryshin and moving beyond the Pokrovsk-Mnoharad agglomeration. On the Zaparigia direction, heavy fighting continues for Huliaipol and for the bridgehead on the Ukrainian side of the Hychul River. There have been relatively few major adjustments over the past 24 hours, which indicates a high intensity of combat. According to pro-Ukrainian mapping services, Russian units have advanced in the southeastern part of Huliaipol and in the adjacent fields. Ukrainian forces are gradually withdrawing toward the western outskirts of the settlement, and strikes are already being delivered against their new positions. In effect, the fighting is shifting toward the extreme western part of the city, including the area around Shevchenko Street. As for the bridgehead beyond the Hychul River, reports of heavy fighting continue to arrive daily from the areas of Kosovtseve, Ternovate, Pishane, Andreevka, and Ostapivske. However, the map there has not changed for several days. Evidently, the Ukrainian side has deployed fresh forces and is attempting to stabilize the situation. At the same time, Russian units continue to carry out FPV drone strikes against Ukrainian armed forces positions west of the river, primarily targeting artillery operating along the Hychul and the R85 highway. One of the key battles at the turn of late 2025 and early 2026 is unfolding here. On the western Zaparigia direction, the Russian side is actively targeting Ukrainian logistics. Video footage has been published showing strikes on previously mined bridges aimed at severely limiting the mobility and supply capabilities of the Ukrainian armed forces during the period of heavy mud and difficult terrain conditions. In the Hryhorivka area, strikes are being recorded against remaining crossings to prevent the transfer of reinforcements from Zaparigia. All of this creates conditions for further advances toward Kharkiv from the direction of Stepnohirsk. Finally, the Odessa direction. For the 9th consecutive day, objective control footage has been arriving, showing strikes against energy infrastructure, logistics, and economically significant facilities in the region. Today, a powerful strike was recorded against a warehouse or storage facility in the Odessa area. The facility was completely destroyed, followed by multiple detonations. Information has also emerged about renewed strikes on the bridge in the area of Myaki, despite Ukrainian statements claiming that traffic had been restored. All of this indicates that tactics are clearly changing, and judging by what we are seeing, 2026 will be fundamentally different from the previous years of the conflict, both in terms of the nature and the scale of combat operations. That is all, friends. Thank you for watching, subscribe to the channel, leave your likes, and all the best to you.